Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm so glad you're here and joining us for the Parent Chat, hosted by Balance in Mind and powered by the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. We have a great night ahead of us. But before we jump in and introduce our guests, I'd like to remind everybody of the upcoming Parent Chats. We really want you to join us for the rest of the semester. We have some absolutely amazing people coming in to chat with us about really powerful topics, just like tonight, of course. Our next one is on March 3rd, Hanging in There Together, Strategies to Support Family Emotional Health Now. And then on relationship with food and with their body. I'll be your host tonight. My name is Sherry Gazit. I'm the founder of Teen Wise and Mom Wise. I'm a teen life coach and a parent coach, and I'm a proud member of the Balance in Mind team. And tonight we have a special guest, and I really hope that I'm saying your name right, Libby. I actually practiced this. So we have Libby Gutschenritter. Is that right?
Got it, Gutschenritter.
Yes. All right, awesome. Okay, she is the Pacific Northwest Engagement Manager for the One Love Foundation, which is a fantastic foundation. I can't wait for you to hear more about it. One Love educates young people about healthy and unhealthy relationships. Both are important. Empowering them to identify and avoid abuse and learn how to love better. I love that line. Libby is responsible for overseeing education programs across the Pacific Northwest, working with schools, student leaders, and local facilitators. So welcome, Libby. We're really happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share a little bit more with you all about One Love and the great work that we do around healthy relationship education. So some quick background on us. One Love is a national leader in educating young people about relationship health. So we know that we are all in relationships. We all have things to learn. And we really set out to make sure that young people have the skills to look around them and see healthy and unhealthy relationships and to know what to do, to have the skills and abilities and the desire to support their friends and their community in their relationships. One Love was founded in 2010 in honor of a young woman named Yardley Love. Yardley was tragically killed by her ex-boyfriend just 3 weeks shy of her college graduation. And Yardley's family realized they thought Yardley had a great relationship. They thought that she was happy. They thought the breakup was just the relationship running its course. And it wasn't until after her death and the trial that they started to hear terms like domestic violence, relationship abuse. And they thought, that's not us, that's not our daughter. But the more that they heard and the more that they learned, they realized so many people in Yardley's life saw the signs. They had the pieces, but they didn't have the language or the tools to put those pieces together. So we now know that over 1 in 3 women, nearly 1 in 3 men, and 1 in 2 trans or non-binary folks will be in an abusive relationship at some point in their lifetime. These are really startling statistics and it can feel really scary. We have many of us on the call. These statistics would say that some of us will experience an abusive relationship at some point. I also at this point like to remind that abuse is not just physical. Abuse can be emotional, it can be mental, psychological. Abuse can show up in a lot of different ways. And so at One Love, we set out to make sure that the young people in our lives are not part of this statistic, that we can prevent it before it turns abusive and give them the language and the tools that Yardley's family wished they had that would have prevented her death. So again, the big idea, we know that 100% of us will be in relationships. We all have relationships in our lives. We have friends, we have family members, we have neighbors, we have coworkers. We have the guy at our favorite sandwich shop that we have a relationship with. And 100% of us can learn how to love better. We all do unhealthy things sometimes. That doesn't mean that we're bad people. It doesn't mean that all of our relationships are unhealthy, but it means that we all have work to do. And we talk about practice all the time. We can all practice loving better. We can practice having healthier relationships. And so we use the language of the 10 signs. We have our healthy and unhealthy behaviors, which are kind of the hallmark of the work that we do. And I'll hold off on diving into these and Sherry, you and I can chat a little bit more and I'll talk about where these behaviors show up.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, I love, Libby, that you mentioned that we have relationships of all different kinds. So while we think of domestic or abusive, toxic relationships as a marriage or a long-term relationship, there's lots of different ways that it can show up. It can be in the workplace. It can be with friendships. So these aren't just saying if you're in a romantic relationship, it's in any kind of relationship, right?
Absolutely. And I think that this is really important because sometimes when we start these conversations with young people, if they're not currently in a romantic relationship, they'll go, oh, well, that's not me. That doesn't apply to me. But we all have friends in our lives. We have classmates, we have coworkers, we have teachers, we have teammates. We practice these relationship skills all the time. And so, especially when with younger students, we think about the friendships are where you practice how you will treat a partner down the road. We talk about like friendship should be a core tenet of a romantic relationship. And so if you don't have these healthy behaviors in a friendship, you're not going to know how to apply them to a romantic relationship later, where there's sometimes more emotion or emotionally charged behaviors.
Mhm. Very true. And even before friendships comes the parent-child relationship, right? Because that's the very first relationship they have in their life. So we
Yes.
have to step back and look at what our patterns are there as well.
Right. And so much too comes from we say at One Love, love is learned. We wish it's so we always joke like, oh, it's so silly that we take all of these obscure I used to be a math teacher in a past life, so I feel comfortable making this joke. We take obscure math classes that don't apply to our day-to-day lives, but nobody teaches us how to love.
Right.
And that's so strange. You would think that so love is something that we learn by practice. We learn by seeing, we absorb it. So as a young person, what we see our parents do is kind of sets the model. And we say, oh, okay, that's what love looks like. And then we try to mimic that for better or for worse.
Right. And it's important to point out, let's say that someone who's watching was in an abusive relationship early on and their kids might have seen that. It doesn't mean that you can't change that, right? And that's where the conversation comes in. And setting those boundaries, saying that's what you saw, but now this is what a healthy relationship is. I'm going to teach you about that.
Absolutely. And I think that reflection and that modeling and that conversation is so important. At One Love, we say label the behavior, not the person. So if as a parent you were previously in an unhealthy relationship, you can, if you feel comfortable at some point, have a conversation with your kids. Say like, hey, this isn't a bad person, but our relationship just didn't work. Here are some of the things you might have seen growing up. Let's talk about that. Belittling is something that sometimes kids see their parents do or experience, or they feel from their parents. So belittling is like talking down to or making somebody feel small with your words. Intensity may be like kind of like the surge or rush of emotions, wanting to spend all of your time together. So we sometimes see that, particularly like sometimes parents do that towards their kids unintentionally. You love your kids so much, you want to spend time with them. But then also talking about comfortable pace on the flip side. What is comfortable for your child? What is comfortable for you? Naming and staking those boundaries and being able to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. That intensity piece is really big for our kids when they begin to get in friendships or romantic relationships where they have a friend or a partner who's, I love you so much, right? That I want to spend all of my time with you. And it seems like such an amazing feeling, right? This person loves me so much. They don't want to have any waking moments without me, but that's unhealthy. And we have to teach our kids that because otherwise they don't realize it.
Absolutely. And sometimes we call that love bombing. You're like, wait, but they're telling me they love me all the time. They bought me all this stuff. This is how could this be bad? And so it's really about teaching young people to listen to their gut. If something feels too much, feels uncomfortable, it is too much. It is uncomfortable, right? It's about what works for you. And so with the way that the 10 signs are set up is they're behaviors that we see. They're not perfect pairs. Some of them are though. And I would say that intensity and comfortable pace go well together. Right. Comfortable pace is setting the pace of how you want your relationship to go. If both people are like really excited to be together, go for it. That's up to you. But if one person wants to be more independent, wants to do more of their own thing, and their partner is really like pressuring them to spend all the time, that's when it can be excessive. And this is also one where I always like to talk about pop culture and the media, because we see when we watch TV, we see new relationships are so exciting. They spend all their time together, always like holding hands in the hallway. Holding hands in the hallway is totally fine, but the movies and TV shows kind of like glamorize that. And so you think that you have to be literally attached at the hip to your partner, but not everybody's comfortable with that. And so it kind of sets these unrealistic expectations. And then young people no longer really know how to navigate what a healthy, comfortable pace or independent relationship looks like.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen that a lot when there's a relationship that forms, a romantic relationship. So the friendships kind of go away. They don't spend any time fostering friendships anymore. And then what happens is they're kind of stuck because they're like, if I don't have this boyfriend or this girlfriend anymore, I don't have any friends to hang out with. So I think that's super important to also instill that in our kids, even if both of them are excited about it, to still maintain those friendships.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of that. That kind of falls in this isolation, unhealthy sign, right? Where your partner only, it's like, I only want you to hang out with me. You mean so much to me. I only want you to be here. Or sometimes there's like some deep-seated jealousy built in there. In heterosexual relationships, we see this a lot. We'll see a boyfriend doesn't want his girlfriend to hang out with any other guys, or a girlfriend doesn't want her boyfriend to hang out with any other girls. There's a lack of trust and this sort of like fear of betrayal, right? So it's, you only hang out with me, and then friendships go by the wayside, and you can feel really lonely. And so as a parent, just making sure that you're kind of keeping an eye out for this, and paying attention, and just asking questions is kind of the way to start that conversation, is asking open-ended questions.
Right. So that's one of the questions that I have for you is, how do we as parents guide our kids without being intrusive or without pushing them away? We all know the Romeo and Juliet story, right? You can't
Yes.
be with them. So it's like, oh, I want to be with them even more. So how
Right.
do we navigate that?
Right. I was gonna say, rule number one, never, ever, ever tell your kid that they have to break up with somebody, because they will double down and dig their heels to the relationship, right? That's like,
Defend them, yeah.
and so instead, we really just encourage to, and I have these 10 signs up, because it's about, when you have the conversation, label the behavior, not the person. So you don't want to go in and say, oh, I think your girlfriend's being abusive, or your boyfriend's doing is an unhealthy person. Because your child is gonna be like, what? I thought my relationship was great. Like, they love me. What are you talking about, mom? Like, you're great. So they're gonna say, oh, you labeled this person? Like, you don't know them. You don't know me. You don't know my life. But if instead you talk about a particular incident that you saw, or you even use some of this language, or just say like, hey, like, it feels like it feels like maybe he was making you feel guilty. How did you feel? Is that right? Did I use the right description? How are you feeling about that? Right? Asking kind of open-ended questions, and just listening. Even just asking something as simple as like, how's your relationship going? Now, your kid might not want to talk to you. At the end of the day, right? Like, teenagers are,
Can't make them.
right, you can't make them. But if you let them know that you care, and you kind of talk to them, you may get like the okay, whatever. They're still listening to you.
Yeah.
And so the more you have the conversations, and the more you just kind of let them know, like, hey, I notice, hey, I'm paying attention. Then when they do get to a point where they feel like they're in trouble, and they feel like they need help, you've opened the door, and you've let them know, I am somebody in your life who is willing and able to support you when you need it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, like you said, just listening. So even if you ask a question, hey, that seemed like it made you feel guilty, and you listen, you may not have to impart advice, just them talking it out. There may be some wheels turning in their head, like, yeah, he is making me feel guilty. Yeah, that doesn't feel too good. I'm not really enjoying this. And so you just get them thinking about it, even if you're not imparting your wisdom.
Right. So it goes both ways, right? Sometimes like your child will just take it and they'll kind of talk away, and they may kind of talk in circles, and but at the end of the day, like they know there's someone they can talk to. If you don't have the type of relationship with your child where you really feel comfortable opening up, or they feel comfortable opening up, that's okay. We use the language of trusted adult. We know not everybody has a perfect relationship with their parents. I actually had a pretty good relationship with my parents, but would have never felt comfortable talking to them. I would have much preferred to go to my aunt. And so I knew that she was somebody in my life. She was a trusted adult I could go to. And my parents were just like, okay, like as long as you're somebody in your life. For some kids, it's a coach. It could be a teacher. It could be like a club advisor. I feel very lucky and grateful that I've had some kids at One Love think of me as a trusted adult because of our student leadership program. So just again, making sure that they have somebody that they want to talk to, and that you just remind them, like, if it's not me, that's fine. I just hope that you're sharing with someone.
Right. And I know that can be such a difficult process for some parents, which
Mhm.
I completely understand, to have somebody else be that trusted adult because you feel like, oh, I want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
But it's better that they have someone to talk to.
Right.
And actually, what I found is, because I am a coach for teens, is that when they talk to me, it's actually opens the door for them to start talking to their parents as well. So
Right.
it's not like if you have someone else they can talk to, that okay, they're never going to talk to me anymore. It doesn't really
Right.
work like
Sometimes it's kind of like it's opening the can of worms. They have to start with somebody. So who's the first person that they're going to talk to? Once you say it, it gets easier to say again and again. You're totally right. Like they just need to talk to somebody first once they start the conversation. And even if your child doesn't want to talk to you right away, and as long as you've made yourself known, that you're willing to, they often will come back. And especially when the relationship ends, you'll kind of see there's this cycle of, um, don't expect a you were right mom or you were right dad, because that doesn't necessarily happen, but through their actions sometimes they'll show like that they heard you, that they listened to you, and that they know, and trust and respect that you're looking out for their best interests.
Right. And I think another thing, like when a relationship ends, instead of starting to badmouth that person, is if it was abusive or toxic, definitely start, talking about the behaviors, but
Mhm.
also like, what did you learn from this relationship? What did you, out of this, what did you decide you want in your future relationships and you do not want in your future relationships? So no judgment in it, just like, hey, let's just stop and reflect on this.
I love that, just like a chance to debrief and to say like, hey, like it may have been an overall unhealthy relationship, but it doesn't mean that good things didn't happen too. So sometimes, right, there are some great lessons to learn. And you never want to shame your child or make them feel bad for having been in the relationship, because we all have things to learn. But you also, can praise them and be proud of them for getting out of the relationship at a time when they felt that that was right for them. So giving them like the post-mortem on the relationship and saying
Right.
like, what did you learn? What did you get out of this?
Mhm. Even in the relationships that are overall good, like
Yeah.
it's always good to kind of debrief your relationships, right? So I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to put up with that.
Yeah.
So I want to stop here, Libby, and I want to ask people who are here a question. Um, who here has been in a bad relationship? And I don't even mean abusive. I mean like thinking back to like fifth grade and on. Like, just give me a thumbs up or something if you want to share. You can too. But I'm interested to know, especially since you started us out, Libby, with that 1 out of 3 that was abusive relationships, right? I
Yep.
think if it was in a bad, quote, bad relationship, it's probably 100% of us, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's like, we've all had those relationships where like, it's not the person that's bad. This just is not a good combo. So
Oh yeah.
I learn from people. Oh yes, I had some doozies in the teenage years too. Looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was really bad. All
Hmm.
right. So let me read this question for you, okay? And just as a reminder, anyone who's on tonight, you are welcome to put questions in the Q&A box if you want to be more anonymous, or you can put them in the chat box as well. In the chat box, you can do it at the very bottom, just put to panelists, and we'll just make sure we don't say your name. All right. So question here. Let me scroll back up. One struggle is knowing when to back off in terms of what you allow your child to do. and the level of freedom they have. Age and maturity plays into this. Thoughts? So I would ask for a follow-up question on this one. Do you mean as far as like in the relationship, or what you allow them to do, like as far as have a date or anything like that? If you can just give me some clarification. If you want to go ahead and give it a try, Libby, to answer that.
I think in general, thinking about, if we're just talking about asking your child, it's kind of, this is maybe not the most helpful, but just trust your gut. And if your child, if you look at body language, so if you're asking a lot of questions and you notice kind of like some tension or discomfort, drop it, right? And come back. So the advice that I give young people all the time when we talk about how to help a friend is just kind of bring up the conversation. If your friend seems uninterested, just say like, okay, I just wanted to check in, and pause the conversation, don't end it, and then come back in a day or two, or kind of when it next comes up, right? So that they know that you're still there and still listening. And then on the flip side, I think you said something about what are you allowing your child to do and levels of freedom. And I think that that's something that's going to be a really personal family decision. I don't want to tell anybody how you should kind of structure, but I think it's really, again, listening to your kids, and kind of at the end of the day, we want to think about how do we model these behaviors. So if you as a parent are modeling for your child that you trust them, modeling honesty and respect and kindness, right? So some of these, like a comfortable pace with them of kind of like navigating and having this conversation. If you are really honest with them and kind of set this up, they'll be honest with you. They won't necessarily like push the boundaries. In my not super expansive experience, I don't have any kids of my own, but in working with kids, when there are really, really tight boundaries, it's almost like kids don't have room to like flex their muscles and room to grow and learn and explore. And so then that's when kind of, right, they break out too quickly. And you can go over the top. But if you're kind of giving them space to learn, and just having an ongoing dialogue about what you're comfortable with and what they're comfortable with. But Sherry, I don't know if you want to jump in and add anything else there.
Yeah, for sure. The whole thing about if you have too much control, they're going to find a way to do things behind your back, and then you're not going to have an open conversation with them. I can remember back to high school, I had one friend whose mom was over the top controlling. Like if she was out with somebody, she would just show up at that place randomly, or she would call the restaurant and have them go find her. And that girl, the things she did that her mom never knew about was like, whoa, and when she got to college, even crazier. So, there is something to be said. They have to have guardrails, but you got to give them room to move a little bit and make decisions, or else, it's going to be like the Romeo and Juliet, where they are going to just like pine over this person and find the drama in going after this one person. So, or doing whatever it is, that they're trying to do. So the clarification on this question was in terms of what you allow them to do when you have a say in their relationships. Yeah. So I think what that question is like, when do you allow them to date or to FaceTime maybe, or hang out at the mall with them? Yeah. And like you said, Libby, every family is different. There's no right or wrong. It's knowing your kid, knowing their level of maturity and responsibility, and also making sure they're safe. Yeah.
And I think it just goes back to, if this is something that, if you have conversations about trust and boundaries early on, and practice letting your kids set boundaries at home with you or their siblings, if they have siblings, they'll learn how to practice trust and set boundaries with a partner. And so letting them be off on their own is really about just kind of making sure that they have the tools, that they know what to do, that they would be able to kind of learn how to say no, or learn how to set a boundary, or express what they need. So it's kind of making sure that they're ready before. Or if you do decide no, making sure that you tell them why and kind of explain, so that, again, that they aren't kind of, because that's going to reinforce that trust.
Absolutely. One thing to remember also is like using the term boyfriend or girlfriend. And if you're talking about the younger age, I mean, it means so many different things. So I remember in middle school when one of my daughters had a boyfriend, and I think they texted maybe once a week, and it was not a big deal, right? Yeah. So Don't freak out when you start hearing that language. Sometimes there's pseudo dating that's going on where they're trying on the labels and, seeing how that feels to have someone attached to them. And
Right.
so yeah, don't panic. Just talk about it, have a conversation.
Yeah. Let them create the labels. And just again, like I was saying before, ask the open-ended questions. If they use the term boyfriend, girlfriend, ask them what that means to them. Or if they use the term partner, ask them what that means to them and kind of just follow their lead.
Right. There was also a follow-up on the last question. Lots of judgment in parenting, and it's always changing. Thank you. Oh my gosh, you are right. There is a lot of judgment in parenting. And for you as a parent, you have to let that parent peer pressure, go to the side and parent with your heart and your gut and do what's right for your family and your kids. And just let all that other noise just kind of be off to the side and not skew you in the wrong way.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So we've talked a bit about this, but for teens, having these new relationships, they're intense, they're intoxicating, they're exciting. So one of the things that we really have to do is look at what are the things that are quote normal or healthy, and what are the things that are unhealthy that we really do need to watch out for in our kids' new relationships, and what are just the purely toxic things that maybe even we as parents don't realize it's toxic.
Yeah.
You might need to go back to your slide.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna bring the slide back up because this is what we look for, right? We look for the behaviors. And I think something that I like to remind young people of and parents, there's a difference between an emotional response and a behavior, right? We all feel jealous sometimes. In jealousy is kind of a normal run-of-the-mill emotion. I feel jealous of if somebody got like a cool new job that I wanted, or if somebody has like shoes that I want, or if somebody goes on a vacation that I wanted to go on. COVID has enhanced some of this jealousy because I think I'm following all the rules, whatever. Social media also induces a lot of this. So jealousy is one thing, but when that jealousy converts into a behavior that affects somebody else. So if you have, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but if you have like a heterosexual relationship and you have a boyfriend who's telling his girlfriend, I don't want you to hang out with any other boys. And his jealousy kind of turns into this possessiveness and isolation if she's around any other guy friends, or vice versa. If a girl is telling her boyfriend, I don't want you to hang out with any other girls. We see this in queer relationships quite a bit as well, where just a partner doesn't want you to hang out with anyone that there's the slightest chance that you would be attracted to them. That jealousy now has gone outside of you and onto somebody else. And so it's where that feeling has now like gotten to be too much. And social media tells us, oh, well, that's just them saying they love you. Like they're just showing you how much they care. But when that starts to boil over and makes you feel really uncomfortable, makes you feel suffocated, makes you feel lonely, that's a flag. That's trusting your gut, knowing like something's not right. That's not right.
Yeah, let's talk about an example for that one. So let's say there's a girl and she goes and hangs out with this guy and her boyfriend is texting, like, what are you doing? Where are you? What are you guys doing next? That is where it kind of goes over the top, right? They're not allowing her to have another relationship or friend.
Yeah.
What's another example you can think of?
I think that's a great example, right? Where there's no trust. There's lots of constant texting. Actually, there's a lot of variations on that example of even just like if a girl's hanging out with her girlfriends and wants to go do something different and the boyfriend is constantly, where are you? What are you doing? Why aren't you texting me back? The extension of that I think is really important to highlight is location sharing.
Yeah.
Snapchat has a feature called Snap Maps where you can see where people are. And so this is sort of like the student version of Find My Friends, Find My iPhone. Here's the big thing that I want to highlight with this. If both people are okay with sharing their location, right? They've had that conversation, they've set the boundary, they're moving at a comfortable pace, that's okay. But if somebody feels like their location is being used against them, or they feel like they're being watched or monitored, for example, I decide to go to the mall and hang out with my friends, and my partner, and I didn't tell my partner that that's what I was doing, and they start texting me and being like, hey, Libby, why are you at the mall? That would make me feel really uncomfortable to know that somebody was watching where I am. And so now it has passed the boundary that I set, where I said, like, let's use our location for safety,
Yeah.
and into kind of this like creepy, there's no trust, right? If you're kind of looking where somebody is, without having a conversation about it and just being like, why are you at the mall?
Yeah. Well, and even the anger piece of it, when they do have that conversation and one person says, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And then all of a sudden there's an anger behind it. Like, why aren't you letting me see where you are? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
That's a big issue.
Well, I think actually this is another great example of the emotion versus behavior. And it's about how the anger comes out, right? Somebody might feel angry, but you can, if you take that anger and you turn it into healthy conflict, right? You raise a conversation and say, like, hey, I was really nervous when you weren't texting me back. I thought something had happened. And that talks about how that made them feel. Or if their anger comes out as volatility, which we kind of describe as like the roller coaster of emotions. You never know what you're going to get. You don't know if somebody's going to be hot, cold, left, right, however. Or you're kind of wondering, are they going to start deflecting responsibility and making me feel like it's my fault that I didn't tell them where I was going, right? So it's that anger can be channeled positively, but unfortunately, more often than not, because of how we see it show up in media and in many people in our lives, it gets channeled into this unhealthy behavior.
Right. Yeah, that's such a big one. Okay, so let's talk about some of these other ones here on the list. There's a lot of great ones.
All right. One that I really like to talk about is this taking responsibility versus deflecting responsibility. This is another one that comes in pairs. And this is really, really hard. There's a lot of pressure, social pressure to like be right, to always like do the right thing. And so when people make mistakes, we're not taught a lot how to own those mistakes or accept those mistakes or take responsibility for what we've done or take responsibility for hurting somebody. And so we want to be able to practice that authentic, true apology or acknowledgement that you might have done something that hurt somebody's feelings, or hurt somebody's being. But then deflecting responsibility is when you're like, oh, well, I only did this because you did something first. Or I only did this because you made me so angry. I had no choice. Right. We actually see this quite a bit when people, instances of people throw things, they'll say, I threw it because you made me so mad. You left me no choice.
So let me ask you about this scenario, because I hear about this a lot from the teens that I work with. So they will actually talk to their the person that they're dating and say, you know, I feel sad or upset or something. And then the other person's like, oh, I'm just not good enough for you. You deserve better than me. Like, where does that fall into the spectrum? Because it's definitely an unhealthy thing. It's not actually taking responsibility.
Yeah, it's a little bit of this like manipulation, guilting, like, oh, kind of like self-sabotage weirdly. But it's a lack of respect, it's a lack of trust, it's a lack of equality also. So it's really important for both partners to be able to see what they bring to the relationship, what they bring. We see this a lot with friendships too. This is kind of how we see like the queen bee figure emerge, is there's a group where they'll say like, oh, I'm not, like, I feel so lucky to be her friend. And then you kind of get sucked into this like vortex where you're like, I'm actually like not having fun in this friendship anymore. I'm not getting anything out of it, but there's so much social capital in there that I'm scared to get out. And so it's again, thinking back about how can you have a healthy relationship with yourself, right? How can you kind of be kind to yourself, have fun doing things that you like, be independent, trusting your own gut. And then I also think this is a great avenue to have a conversation with young people around. You don't have to be in a relationship all the time. There's so much social capital around being in a relationship. We see in the media, like there's this whole like prom king, prom queen trope, like you have to have this like really happy relationship, but a lot of kids might not be ready, might not feel comfortable, might not see their identities reflected in that media. And so it's okay to not be in a relationship. It's okay for a relationship to end. You didn't fail as a person if your relationship didn't work out. You might just not have been compatible. There might not be a great reason why it didn't end, why it didn't keep going. So helping your kids find their own kind of self-worth and their own healthy relationship with themselves is really underrated, but really important.
Yeah, for sure. Like you need to be able to love yourself before you can truly love someone else. And we have to
Right.
teach our kids that because some people will go into a relationship because they are feeling sad or not loving themselves and they think that's going to fix it, and that just manifests itself in that relationship.
Yeah. It's like covering it up instead of solving the problem.
Exactly. All right, so let's look at the one oh, there was one I wanted to do, the sabotage. What does that mean? Tell us about that.
Sabotage is a really interesting one that we see in a lot of different ways where when you step outside the relationship, you're like, how could anyone ever let that happen? But it happens, there can be little subtle digs. And often it shows up when one person thinks that their interests or their needs or their obligations are more important than the other. So in one of the workshops, One Love's curriculum is mostly film-based workshops. In one of the films, there's this example of there's a guy and a girl, they're kind of like lounging at home, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go to lacrosse practice. And she's like, no, 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 skip practice, hang out with me. Like practice doesn't matter. Like you should hang out with me. Like we haven't spent time together in a long time. And he's like, look, like this is important to me. Like I want to go to practice. And she's like, no, you should, like, you really should skip. And it's that kind of like, that's a small example, but every time I have this conversation with a group of high school boys, they're like, yep, that's happened to me. Not to
Yeah.
play stereotype, but it's quite common. And a lot of girls have had a similar experience of, oh, skip practice, skip this activity. It's the sabotage of saying like, what matters to you doesn't matter as much as I matter.
Mm-hmm.
Your interests aren't as important as me. So if your partner doesn't respect, or we see this actually a lot with friends too, of, oh, you're in that club, like, that doesn't matter, don't go to that. Or like, you should, or skipping class, we see a lot of. So skipping it's like kind of a low level example, but it's really easy for young people to connect with, because almost everyone has either been pressured to do it, or has pressured somebody else to do it.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. Like listening to you describe all these things, I'm thinking back to my own teenage years and I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that one time. And oh my gosh, my boyfriend did that one time. So I think we have to remember that if you've done these or you see this in the relationship with your teens, don't automatically be like, oh my gosh, it's toxic, this is abusive,
Right.
because they're learning how to be in a relationship, right? I think the big thing is to recognize the signs as a whole package here. Is the relationship unhealthy? There's some bad things that happen, but overall, is it healthy or unhealthy? And that's what we have to teach our kids, to look for these things, understand their boundaries, and understand how to get out of a relationship if it's not a good one for them.
Absolutely. And also, I love how you just said that, because it's not about, if there's like a one-time thing, I always joke, I like to deflect responsibility around emptying the dishwasher. It is not a chore that I enjoy. But at the end of the day, if my relationship, if there's a pattern of unhealthy things, so if I'm always deflecting responsibility about chores around the house, or trying to make my partner feel like it's his responsibility and he has to do it, and how dare he ever put this on me, or little things like that, if there's a pattern and it builds up, or if they're used to try to control what somebody else does, we see guilting and manipulation are kind of the ones where we see a lot of that. That's the bright red flag. That's when it's going to get into this unhealthy, and then it can start to shift into abusive relationships.
Right. And I think for our kids to realize these unhealthy relationship patterns, if they see this, like, oh, it happens one time in their relationship, they're able to recognize that and say, okay, I need to talk about this so it doesn't become a pattern, because they
Right.
are learning. Like, let's say the sabotage one. So the girl says, don't go to lacrosse practice because I want to be with you. And so he says, yes. Well, now a pattern can be started, right? Because
Right.
the girl's like, oh, that worked, I'm going to do that next time. And then he says yes again. And then it's all of a sudden a pattern that she's learned. Doesn't make her evil or horrible person. It's all patterns.
Right. And we can repair those patterns. We can come back from that. relationships can be, right? So in some cases, there's like the point of no return. There's the danger. There's you feel like it's gone too far and you want to get out. But in a lot of cases, actually, these unhealthy behaviors can be talked through. You can have healthy conflict. Healthy conflict means that there's respect, there's equality, there's kindness, there's honesty in the conversation, and that there's a commitment and a follow through to do better in the future. So I can promise, I'm so sorry, I'm never going to ask you to skip lacrosse practice again. And then next week I do the same thing. That's belittling because I'm trying to I'm making him feel like his practice doesn't matter. I'm being manipulative again, right? And I'm continuing to sabotage. So if they keep coming back, actions speak louder than words.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and I think that brings us we've been talking about relationships in general, but let's talk more about the abusive relationships. Mm-hmm. So let's say that we have, our kids are in a relationship and we see that, wow, this is unhealthy in so many ways, potentially abusive, definitely toxic. Like, how do we step in without the Romeo Juliet scenario happening? And I know we talked about have a conversation, but we're talking about this is way out of control, right? This isn't just about what do you think or how do you feel?
Right. So the hope is at this point that you've been having conversations along the way so that there's some sort of dialogue in your home around your child's relationship. If not, though, that's okay. Sometimes you don't. I sometimes use the boiling frog analogy. We don't always notice what's happening around us until it's like reached the tipping point, because it is kind of this slow, incremental. Sometimes we talk about like you don't get hit on a first date because then there wouldn't be a second date, right? So the abusive behaviors aren't there from the beginning. They kind of build and slowly the control seeps in, the manipulation seeps in, and it evolves. So if there are things that are jumping out at you, you're really feeling like this is bad, I got to get my kid out. There's a couple of things that you can do. One is you can, if you feel comfortable, you can have a conversation. If you don't feel like you're the right person, but you have a relationship with your child's friends, you could also talk to them and figure out like, have they been having a conversation? Right, like, so the friends may have already started to kind of plant the seeds to talk about the unhealthy relationship. They may have a better entry point. The friends may also know okay, your child doesn't want to talk to you, but hey, maybe she has a great relationship with her swim coach. So then you can go to the swim coach. At the end of the day, though, we also have a lot of great resources in Washington. There's a lot of really wonderful domestic violence prevention agencies that have 24-hour hotlines that are trained to give situational specific advice. So I don't want to give you any like blanket advice because every relationship is really different. If you feel like there's danger, right, contacting those advocates, and they can walk you through the best course of action for your child, depending on the specific situation. But at the end of the day, it's really like trust your gut and pay attention. If there's a relationship with your child's partner's parent, you may want to contact the other adult that you know and say like, hey, I think we need to have a conversation about our kids' relationship. Again, not always the best move, but in some cases that may be the option. So
yeah, you have to be careful on that one. I just want to say, because if it is an abusive, especially physical, and the boyfriend or girlfriend finds out about that, it can escalate really quick. So you got to, like you said, you got to know your gut. You got to know the situation. But the bottom line is do something. Don't just say, yep, I'm not sure, it doesn't feel right. Like if you get your child is in danger, it is your obligation to do something. I would definitely say talking to their friends is a very good first step. If you don't have your kids' closest friends in your contact list, I would highly recommend that you do that for many reasons. When you ask for that, just tell your kids, I'm not going to contact them unless I really need to, but if you are missing, or if I would need to have their contact info. So and I also like to give my kids' friends my number just in case they ever need anything, that they know they can reach out to me. So and I think your idea of, talking to the friends can be such a relief if those friends are trying to help the daughter or the son deal with a situation they don't know where to go next. It can be such a relief to have an adult actually contact them and say, hey, I think something's going on. I want to help. What can I do?
Yeah, it's really just having, I think when we think about Yardley's story as a cautionary tale, the hard part was that people had all of the information was out there, but it wasn't coming together.
Right.
And because it felt like a taboo thing, right? Even now, 10 years later, it's 11 years later, we don't talk about relationships very much. We talk about it more. We're trying to really hack down the stigma, but it's even just talking about mental health can be challenging. Talking about relationships, there's this pressure to make everything look great. Or this pressure that if you ask for help, it's going to be labeled that somebody's an abuser and you're going to ruin their whole life. So it's this like this 0 to 100, hot and cold. But what we really want to do is teach folks how to navigate the middle ground and realize that relationships are on a spectrum. We have super healthy, we have scary, physically abusive, but we have all this whole sliding scale in the middle, and we can move up and down. But if we talk about it and we kind of normalize talking about it, and normalize asking for help or advice, we can shift closer to this healthy end of the spectrum.
Exactly. And there's, another thing along the spectrum is sometimes there's two really great people that when they get in a relationship, oh my gosh, something happens and the two of them just, it's volatile. And so we have to realize that too. Like if our kids are in a relationship, we don't need to get super judgy about the other person if the relationship's kind of, all over the place. We can just realize they're learning and there's something about them together that just does not work. Because sometimes our kids do have some responsibility in everything going on. And we don't want to see that, right? We just want to see the other person as them doing their thing. But sometimes it is the combination that, maybe there's 2 or 3 things on the unhealthy side that one person's doing, 2 or 3 things the other person's doing, and it just is not good all around.
Yeah, sometimes it just like doesn't add up how you wanted it to add up. And I think that again goes back to normalizing breakups. It's okay to break up. Your life isn't over. The world isn't ending. The walls don't come crashing down if a relationship ends. I used to know this. There's some statistic. It's not very many people end up with their high school sweethearts in the long run. Some people do, and that's great. But not very many do. But we still have so much to those relationships. We still learn a ton from. There's a lot of great experiences that can come out of those relationships, but it's okay if they're not forever. And there's like you said earlier, like have the debrief, talk about what you learned. But also like telling if you as a parent feel comfortable talking to your kids about your own experiences with breakups and your own past relationships and kind of the arcs of those so that they can hear, oh, this is somebody who was in a relationship, that relationship ended, they're okay now.
Right.
Life goes on.
Yeah, and it's going to be uncomfortable if it ends. It's not going to be wonderful and amazing if you break off a relationship.
Yeah.
But it is okay to be uncomfortable, and I think that's an important piece too. Like there is sometimes in a relationship, parts of it are going to be uncomfortable, but overall, it shouldn't be all the time. Especially in high school, when, like you said, it's not your lifetime partner, so you don't have to work through every issue.
Right. We also like to normalize that it's okay to miss an unhealthy partner. There is a statistic, it takes on average 7 times to fully end an unhealthy relationship. But you're like, what? 7 times seems like a lot. But there oftentimes the reasons that these relationships, that folks stay in the relationship so long that it gets so unhealthy is because there are good things too. The problem is the unhealthy things outweigh or overshadow the good things. And so reminding somebody, hey, it's okay that you miss them. There were great things that happened in the relationship, but let's remember the reason you broke up with them. A great piece of advice that I've heard quite a bit is if you're ending a relationship, write down the reasons why you decided to end that relationship. Give them to a friend, put them in a box, set them aside. So if you get in this feeling, you're like, wow, I really miss them. You can pull that list back out and be like, but this is why I made the decision that I made for me. I feel good about this decision. Thank you, list, for reminding me. And can kind of help you like quell that, the urge to get back together.
Right. I love that. And it's also a great list to keep for the future, right? Future relationships.
Right. Like qualities didn't work.
Yeah. Right. Not work. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. It can make it easier as you continue dating to be like, 2 months in, nope, this isn't going to work.
Right.
None of us spend so much time on it. Awesome. Okay, so let me ask you one question before we sign off for the night, because we're getting to the end of the night here. And by the way, everybody, just so you know, we will post all the links to the One Love Foundation. We will post the links that Libby was referring to, like the hotlines and stuff that you can call. We'll do that in the follow-up email that everyone will get either tomorrow, in a couple days, whenever they can get that put together.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the question for you. Ready?
Ready.
Okay, my son started dating a girl who is very demanding. We've allowed him to have her in our quarantine bubble. He really likes this girl, but she doesn't treat him very well. I think he'd just be defensive if I raise concerns, so I'm not sure how to help him stand up for himself in this relationship.
I think that's a scenario that I feel like I've heard quite a bit. And it can be especially hard. I think quarantine has added some challenges. When you add people to your bubble, you're like, well, they're spending time with us. I don't spend time with that many people. So it can be even harder to kind of cut off the relationship or step back from the relationship. But I would say start by just asking him, like, hey, how are you feeling? How's your relationship going? Or, hey, I overheard her insist that you go with her to the pizza place, but you seemed like you didn't seem so excited about it. Or you just don't even say that. How did that feel?
Mm-hmm.
You might not answer the question. You might be like, it's fine, mom, right? Like,
Right.
It's fine. Like pizza's fine, like whatever, it's not a big deal. You will get, it's not a big deal a lot.
Yes.
But the fact that you asked, the fact that you noticed plants the seed that it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. So the next time, right? If something happens again, and now this time, like she's really pushing to go on a hike, but it's really cold and he didn't want to go, right? Saying like, hey, like, how was the hike? Like, did you want to go? Or even saying like, well, what was something that you would have rather done instead? Hey, saying like, I know you really like going skateboarding. Maybe you can suggest that next time, right? And kind of like these like low level, not super confrontational things, giving your kid the chance to kind of like, okay. But they're hearing it, they're going to listen to the suggestion, and maybe next time they'll go skateboarding instead.
Right. It's sinking in. In. Okay, I think we have time for one more question here. Okay. My daughter's boyfriend is a very troubled kid. He has mental health struggles that he draws my daughter into, and he experiments with smoking and drinking. I'm worried about the influence he's having on her, but I don't want to alienate my daughter. Any suggestions?
I think the important thing to remember with mental health is that there is always more than we can see. Mm-hmm. So there may be a lot going on in this young man's life that you don't know about, that your daughter doesn't know about. And so remembering for yourself, right, that we're hoping that he has a support system. We know that whatever's happening is, unless you yourself are a mental health professional, it's not, one person can't save one person. Right. So especially for your daughter, if she's feeling like I have to help him, I have to save him, he needs me. He says he's gonna, like, he would die without me. Saying like, that's not fair to you. That's a lot of pressure on you. And letting her know there's only so much that she can do as a high school student. There's only so much that you can do to help somebody else. You want to be there for them, but at the end of the day, this is where you would tap into the mental health professional. I would recommend in this case, maybe reaching out if your kids go to the same school, or if you know the school he goes to, getting in touch with the counselor at that school. Often there are people will already know little bits of what's going on. And again, it's collecting the puzzle pieces so you can put it all together. And maybe they'll say like, thanks, I already know that. Or they'll say, wow, thank you so much for telling me. You didn't know that this particular thing was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, one of the things is, I don't think as a parent, we should say our kids can't date anyone who has mental health issues, right? Because if we look at the stats, that's like a lot of our kids. Mm-hmm. But we do have to make sure that there's that boundary, that they aren't the sole caretaker of this person. Right. They aren't trying to be the mental health, therapist for them. So it's really important that you keep, like you were saying in this question, not alienating your daughter, that you're able to have non-judgmental conversations about this young man in a caring way, right? That if she cares about him, then you probably should care about him too, his well-being. And so say, does he have the resources he needs? Is he seeing a therapist? is the drinking and the smoking and all of that, is that addictive? Like, does he need to get some help? So that you're there as a resource, not just saying he's bad, you can't see him, because that does become a thing that alienates you, unfortunately.
And it's also a great opportunity to talk to your daughter about her boundaries too. So she may giving her a chance to practice setting boundaries around the drinking and drug use. If that's something that she, right, like she can communicate what she wants to do. And she can also communicate when he asks for help or reaches out, what she is and isn't able to provide in terms of support. But again, I love your point around we don't want to further the stigma around mental health. And just remembering, right, there's more than meets the eye. There's probably a lot going on in this young man's life. Doing what we can, but not more than we're able.
Right. And make sure they have the text line, all that stuff that they need.
Yeah.
And one thing you can also say is, like, I'm curious, like, what is your like too much level? Like, at what point is it too much for you, so that you kind of have an idea of, what boundary they're setting for themselves.
Yeah.
Is it too much if he says, like the comment you made, if you leave me, I will kill myself, unfortunately, that is something that people will say to manipulate people into, staying in a relationship. So, to kind of go through that conversation, what is too much for you? At what point is it just too much for you to stay in the relationship?
That's a great way to make boundaries sound a lot less intimidating, right? Just what's too much.
Right. And also it's a way to say, I'm not setting that, you're going to decide that.
Right.
It's not under my control.
Right.
No, just super important. Wow, Libby, we are out of time. I think we could continue this conversation for like 2 or 3 hours, because there's so many other questions in my mind, but I think we've covered a lot tonight, and I think we have a really good foundation for our parents to have this talk with their kids, to understand the importance of it. And we'll make sure that we get this slide in, somehow in our Facebook group or something, so people will have these different things to look at, to talk to their kids about. So just tell us, even though they're going to get it in the email, where can they find more about the One Love Foundation?
Yes. So on this little slide on the bottom, joinoneLove.org is our website. That's where we house all of our information. My contact information is in there somewhere. We also just have a general contact page. So if there's a question that you come up with that you didn't get a chance to ask tonight, or if you want to get more involved with One Love, we have a volunteer network out here on the West Coast. As well as a lot of different ways. If your kids want to get involved, we have student leadership programs. So if you want to learn more about the organization or have more questions, send those my way. We'll also make sure that you do get access to the resources that are available from our partner organizations that provide hotlines and other prevention resources.
That's great. And I would highly recommend that everybody go to the website and share the videos that they have.
Yes.
They're very well done. There's some that are extremely intense, but there's also some that are a little more cute. But yeah, it has some really great videos that are just fantastic. So you can start the conversation with your teen like that. Go to One Love Foundation and watch some of the videos together. That'll work.
Yep. And it's joinoneLove.org. And if you want to follow us on social media, also, we have an incredible marketing team. There's a lot of great youth accessible stuff out there. It's at join one, the number one love. So I just put both of those in the chat if you can see them. But again, everything's linked through our website.
Is that Instagram and Facebook?
That's Instagram and TikTok, and Facebook, I think, is One Love. If you just search the One Love Foundation, it should pop up.
We'll find you. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Libby. I really appreciate your time tonight. We went through so much. Oh my gosh, there's so much spinning in my head. But we hope that everyone who came tonight, thanks for spending your time with us. And we hope to see you in, March 3rd for our next parent chat, which is hanging in there, strategies to support family emotional health. Good night, everyone. Have a fantastic night, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.